The clock struck 11:17 p.m., its metallic hands cutting through the quiet hum of the nearly empty coffee shop. Vicki Smith slipped her apron over the counter, her fingers brushing the polished wood one last time. The fluorescent lights of Java Jolt flickered softly above her head, but the warmth of the night pressed heavier than the lights ever could. Outside, the Florida heat clung like a damp blanket, dripping down her neck, weighing her shoulders down with exhaustion. She didn't have time to feel. Vicki's laugh, usually so bright and unrestrained, had faded that evening into quiet steps and careful movements. Her shift was done, yet her mind buzzed with plans for her move to Atlanta, her dream of immersing herself in a world full of color and art. She tugged at the silver locket resting against her chest. A gift from her grandmother, warm and familiar, a piece of home she carried with her everywhere. It was a comfort she would soon wish had been more than just sentimental. She glanced toward the door, pulling the dark green polo tighter against her frame. The streets of Orlando were empty, except for the occasional headlights streaking past, reflections bouncing off the asphalt. Her Honda Civic sat in the corner of the lot, its small frame almost swallowed by the shadows. The broken headlights stared back at her, a small flaw in her otherwise ordinary night, a vulnerability she couldn't yet understand. The walk from Java Jolt to her apartment should have been simple, routine, a few blocks under the glow of street lamps, past shuttered stores and the soft hum of air conditioners in apartment windows. But that night, every step carried an unspoken danger. She didn't see it, couldn't sense it, and yet it hovered, patient and waiting, like a storm gathering far off but racing in faster than anyone could react. Vicki adjusted the strap of her bag, her mind flitting to Lauren, to the plans they had made, to the sparkling wine waiting for celebration. None of it mattered anymore. She stepped off the curb and into the night, unaware that the ordinary walk she had taken countless times would be the last she ever took freely. Before we dive into this shocking and heartbreaking story, if you enjoy powerful cold case stories like this, you may want to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And let us know the country you're watching from in the comments. We truly love reading them. The night wrapped around Vicki like a suffocating shroud as she walked down the dimly lit street, the sweat of the humid Florida evening clinging to her skin. Her footsteps echoed softly, mingling with the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a neighborhood dog. Every street lamp she passed flickered, offering only a fragile circle of light before plunging her again into shadows. She had done this walk countless times before, but tonight, the familiar had turned into something unforgiving, something that would steal her from the world she knew. Her mind wandered briefly. Lauren, the move to Atlanta, the future she had been shaping with care, and then snapped back as a car slowed near the corner ahead. The dark sedan idled for a moment, just enough to make the air thick, heavy. Vicki tightened her grip on her bag, instinct whispering caution. But the ordinary man inside the vehicle smiled, nodding politely, giving no hint of the horror to come. She didn't see the danger. She didn't anticipate it. One wrong choice, one misplaced trust, and her life so bright, so full of promise, was suddenly at the mercy of a stranger. In the span of a heartbeat, she vanished. The soft click of her shoes on the pavement stopped, replaced by silence. A silence that would stretch for decades. Back in her apartment, the scene remained unchanged, perfectly ordinary. A half-finished painting lay where she had left it. Her wallet, ID, and cash rested undisturbed on the kitchen counter. Her small white Civic sat where she parked it, broken headlight blinking harmlessly at the night. Nothing signaled the violence that had already occurred. No evidence of struggle, no cry for help. Only absence, her absence, sharp and cruel, cutting through the lives of those who loved her. Anger simmered, hot and relentless. How could someone take a life so full of light with such ease? How could the world allow such a disappearance, leaving behind a normalcy that mocked grief and demanded patience from those left behind? The community would soon feel the first tremors of shock, the realization that one of their own had been stolen without warning, without reason, and without leaving a trace. 2 days later, Lauren Wilkes and Mrs. Evelyn Albright stepped into Vicki's apartment, their hearts heavy with unease. The door swung open to reveal a space frozen in time. A half-finished painting leaned on the easel, colors bright and hopeful, untouched. A library book lay open on the nightstand, the page facing down as if paused mid-thought. Her wallet, ID, and cash were still on the kitchen counter. The Civic sat outside, the broken headlight gleaming dully in the morning sun. Everything was normal, yet the girl herself was gone. Lauren's chest tightened, a cold, suffocating ache that made it hard to breathe. Panic surged into anger, hot and raw. How could Vicki vanish like this? How could the world allow her to disappear while everything else remained perfectly ordinary? Every object in the apartment was a cruel reminder of her absence, each one whispering the same impossible question. Where is she? The Orlando Police Department arrived, their calm, methodical presence contrasting sharply with the storm raging inside Lauren. They treated the case with cautious professionalism. Another missing adult? Perhaps a disagreement? Maybe a sudden trip. But Lauren knew the truth. Vicki had no reason to run. She wasn't impulsive or reckless. She had plans, dreams, and a life carefully being built, step by step. The police caution only fueled the fire of frustration and anger in Lauren's chest. As the officers asked routine questions, Lauren's mind raced through every possibility, every interaction Vicki had that week. Each theory was darker than the last, none bringing comfort, only a gnawing fear that someone, somewhere, had decided to take Vicki from them. The silence of the apartment pressed down, oppressive and accusing, and Lauren felt the first sharp sting of helplessness. The neighborhood, too, began to sense that something was deeply wrong. Whispers floated through the corridors of Palm Court Estates. Neighbors wondering aloud, speculating, fearful that a predator had walked among them unnoticed. The ordinary had been shattered. The familiar streets, the mundane routines, suddenly felt dangerous. Anger, fear, and grief blended into a cocktail that would consume the community for years to come. What if someone you trust could vanish in the blink of an eye? Could you spot danger in the familiar? Stick around to uncover the shocking twist in this decades-old mystery. Lauren's heart raced as she realized Vicki hadn't returned her calls, hadn't shown up for her shift, hadn't stepped into the life she had been building. Panic gripped her like a vice, anger simmering beneath the surface at the thought that someone, some invisible hand, could take her best friend with such ease. She grabbed flyers, her fingers trembling, and began plastering them on every utility pole and storefront along the bustling streets of Orlando. Neighbors watched with unease as Lauren moved door to door, knocking, calling, pleading for any information. Each unanswered question and empty doorway deepened the ache in her chest, and yet she refused to stop. Sweat clung to her skin under the oppressive Florida heat, but the fear was hotter, sharper, burning with every passing second that Vicki remained missing. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers joined the search, swept up by Lauren's relentless drive. Volunteers combed nearby parks, parking lots, and quiet streets, calling Vicki's name into the humid night. Each echo of her name was a haunting reminder of absence, a voice swallowed by the city that had no answer. With every flyer handed to a passerby, every desperate plea made to a neighbor, the stakes grew heavier. Time was slipping away, and with it, the hope that Vicki could be found unharmed. The sense of helplessness was a knife twisting in Lauren's gut, anger and fear combining into a single, driving force. The city itself seemed to pulse with uncertainty, each street corner holding the possibility of discovery or the chilling confirmation that she was already gone. The frantic search was more than an act of hope. It was an emotional declaration that Vicki's life mattered, that someone would not let her be forgotten, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. The Orlando Police Department arrived with measured professionalism, their presence both reassuring and infuriating. They asked questions, took notes, and cataloged every detail. But to Lauren, their caution felt like delay, each careful step a widening chasm between hope and reality. The initial assessment treated Vicki as a missing adult, a young woman who might have simply wandered off. That notion struck Lauren like a blow. Vicki had plans, a life she was building, a future that could not be abandoned on a whim. Detective Victor Sterling, assigned to the case, was diligent but restrained, wary of leaping to conclusions that could misdirect resources. Interviews were conducted with co-workers, neighbors, and anyone who might have glimpsed Vicki's path. Every lead was checked, every alibi scrutinized. Yet for Lauren, each passing hour without results only amplified her anguish. The procedural thoroughness that protected the police from mistakes felt like an obstacle to finding her friend alive. Calls to the precinct were frequent, each one ending with promises to follow up, to investigate, to leave no stone unturned. But the reassurances did little to quiet the rising storm inside Lauren. The city's heat pressed down, mirroring the suffocating tension in her chest. Streets were combed, checkpoints established, surveillance reviewed, but the evidence simply wasn't there, leaving only the sense of a growing void. The officers did their work, methodical and careful, but the clock ticked, and the gap between the missing and the searchers widened. Every hour, every unanswered question, deepened the ache of uncertainty. For the community, frustration began to seep into whispers, concern mixed with disbelief. Something felt off, and though the police acted cautiously, the fear and anger of those who knew Vicki intensified, creating a quiet urgency that would not be ignored. Trevor Klein, Vicki's shift supervisor at Java Jolt, became the first anchor in the investigation's timeline. He remembered her clocking out at 11:17 p.m. that night, commenting briefly on the broken headlight and the long walk ahead. His recollections were precise, routine, yet they carried an unspoken tension. He had watched her leave, unaware that the ordinary moment would become a haunting memory. Every detail he shared, every description of her uniform and the silver locket, painted a picture of normalcy that now felt fragile, almost deceptive. Then there was Arthur Vance, a reserved man in his late 30s who frequented the coffee shop for late-night black coffee. He had been present that evening, lingering near the counter, eyes flicking up from his newspaper. His story was straightforward, unremarkable. He had seen Vicki leave but admitted to being preoccupied with a work call on his flip phone. His alibi, a night shift 30 miles away, held up under scrutiny. Yet his presence introduced the first flicker of unease, the thought that someone ordinary could intersect with tragedy in the blink of an eye. Together, Trevor and Vance formed the earliest framework of the night, the first reference points for a case that would soon feel like chasing shadows. The police noted each statement, yet the pieces refused to fit. Small details, the broken headlight, the quiet streets, the darkened sedan glimpsed on grainy surveillance, hinted at danger, but offered no clarity. A sense of incompleteness settled over the investigation. The police thought they had a lead, but what they found instead would leave them baffled for years. Each timeline anchor, each minor observation, seemed to tease a resolution that remained out of reach, deepening both Lauren's anguish and the audience's anticipation. The investigation pressed on, but the city seemed to swallow every clue, leaving only dead ends in its wake. Forensics combed the quarter-mile walk from Java Jolt to Palm Court Estates, searching for footprints, scuff marks, or anything that could suggest a struggle. They found nothing. No signs of a fight, no discarded clothing, no physical evidence to anchor the nightmare that had begun to unfold. The grainy convenience store footage, which had shown a dark sedan lingering near the corner, offered little hope. The car's make and model were barely distinguishable. The driver remained a shadow behind tinted windows, obscured by a tree, an enigma that defied capture. Every lead seemed promising, yet led only to frustration, leaving Detective Sterling and his team grasping at fragments that refused to connect. For Lauren, every hour without answers twisted deeper into despair. Volunteers returned from fruitless searches. Flyers had begun to curl and fade in the relentless Florida sun, and the community's initial energy dissolved into anxious whispers. The absence of tangible evidence made the disappearance even more unbearable. Each unanswered question became a sharp pang, every plausible theory a knife twisting further into hope that could not be realized. The police had methods, protocols, and experience, yet nothing could replace the human need for clarity, for justice, for the simple assurance that Vicki might be found. The streets remained ordinary, her apartment untouched, the broken headlight blinking silently in the night, quiet reminders of a nightmare that had already begun to take root. The case, already steeped in fear and anger, began its slow drift toward the cold files, a haunting puzzle of absence and frustration. And yet, even as the leads evaporated, a quiet tension lingered, whispering that the truth had not vanished entirely. It was waiting, locked in time, poised to reveal itself in a way no one could have imagined. Rumors began to ripple through Palm Court Estates almost immediately. Whispers carried along the sidewalks and over backyard fences, each one heavier than the last. Some neighbors, struggling to make sense of Vicki's sudden disappearance, suggested that the threat had come from someone she knew. Could it really be true? Could someone trusted, someone ordinary, have carried out an act so horrifying without leaving a trace? Lauren Wilkes listened to the murmurs with a mix of anger and despair. The idea that Vicki might have been taken by someone within her circle was unbearable. Every familiar face, friends, acquaintances, even the barista who had shared her laughter during late-night shifts, seemed to hide possibilities. The notion that danger could reside behind a friendly smile or a neighborly greeting made the very walls of her world feel unsafe. The community, once comfortable in its routines, now moved cautiously, eyes flicking at every passerby, hearts quickening at each unfamiliar car or unfamiliar voice. Each speculation fueled both fear and outrage, creating a tense environment in which trust was fragile and suspicion grew like wildfire. Conversations ended abruptly, doors were double-locked, and the familiar streets seemed to whisper caution with every gust of the humid night air. Detective Sterling, too, felt the invisible pressure. The whispers and theories of insiders collided with procedural necessity, forcing him to weigh each step carefully. He was trapped between public fear and the limits of evidence, aware that rushing to judgment could destroy innocent lives, but failing to act could allow a killer to remain free. The community's tension, rooted in the fear that someone close could betray them, became a weight everyone carried. And in that fear, a question lingered, one that haunted every neighbor, every friend, every volunteer searching for answers. Could someone you trust vanish in the blink of an eye and leave nothing but suspicion behind? Other whispers took a different shape, shifting blame from familiar faces to strangers passing through the city. Some residents feared a drifter, someone with no roots, no ties, someone invisible, yet dangerous. The idea that a transient, a fleeting presence, could snatch Vicki from the streets of Orlando ignited an unsettling panic. How could anyone protect themselves when the threat was faceless and unknowable? Neighbors recalled fleeting glimpses of unfamiliar cars, strangers wandering too close to apartment entrances, and the faint memory of a dark sedan seen idling near the Java Jolt the night she vanished. Every small detail became amplified under the weight of suspicion, each passing figure a potential predator. The city that had once felt predictable now seemed unpredictable, each corner holding a hidden danger, each street echoing the possibility of violence. Lauren felt the tension rise with every theory. The thought that Vicki's disappearance could be the result of random cruelty from an outsider was terrifying in its randomness. Anger merged with helplessness. How could a community defend against someone they would never meet? Someone who could come and go unnoticed, leaving nothing but absence and fear behind. For the residents of Palm Court Estates, normal life became a series of small precautions: double-checking doors, walking in groups, watching cars linger too long. Conversations turned to speculation, fear, and the possibility that danger could strike again at any moment. The uncertainty of the drifter theory added a new dimension of anxiety. It was no longer just a personal loss. It became a collective dread. Every neighbor wondered silently, what would you do if a stranger could appear, take someone you care about, and vanish without a trace? The city held its breath, trapped between hope for Vicki's return and the shadow of invisible danger. As days turned into weeks, whispers of frustration shifted toward the Orlando Police Department. Many in the community began questioning the dedication and capability of those tasked with finding Vicki. Calls to the precinct, once hopeful, now carried a sharp edge of anger. Are they doing enough? Can they be trusted to protect us? The doubts simmered like heat over the city, creating tension not just about Vicki's disappearance, but about the very system meant to safeguard the community. Lauren felt the sting of helplessness with every unanswered question. Each promise from the police to investigate, to follow up, to leave no lead unchecked, was met with delays, red tape, and the slow grind of bureaucracy. Her anxiety, already raw from grief and fear, was magnified by a sense of isolation. The procedures that were supposed to protect evidence now felt like barriers between her and justice. Detective Sterling carried the weight of these expectations quietly, but it pressed on him like a physical burden. The frustration of a missing young woman, the demands of a fearful community, and the invisible gaze of public judgment all combined into an unbearable pressure. Every decision, every step in the investigation, became a balance between caution and urgency, between method and moral responsibility. The tension spread beyond individual grief. Neighbors and friends began to second-guess each other, suspicion and doubt infiltrating casual conversations. The fear that Vicki's disappearance might remain unresolved forever gnawed at the collective psyche. In the midst of this, a question lingered, sharp and unrelenting. Have you ever felt powerless watching someone you care about slip through the cracks, while the system moves too slowly to intervene? It was a question that united the community in fear and despair, intensifying the emotional strain that would only grow as the investigation stretched into months with no answers. As the days stretched into weeks and the weeks into months, the initial shock of Vicki's disappearance began to give way to a gnawing, pervasive despair. The community, once united in frantic search efforts, found their energy waning. Flyers faded, volunteer patrols slowed, and the vibrant hope that had fueled early efforts dulled into anxious resignation. Every unanswered call, every lead that led nowhere, carved away at the belief that Vicki could be found alive. Lauren Wilkes bore the heaviest weight. Each day, she passed Vicki's empty apartment, its quiet normalcy, a cruel reminder of a life abruptly halted. She replayed the last known moments in her mind, the laughter shared, the plans made, the ordinary Friday night that ended in incomprehensible absence. Sleep became erratic, thoughts relentless, a constant ache that no reassurance could soothe. Neighbors, too, felt the erosion of hope. Conversations shifted from practical search strategies to whispers of theories, speculations, and worst-case scenarios. Anxiety became routine. Fear settled into the corners of familiar streets. The city's warm nights, once a backdrop to ordinary life, now carried the tension of unspoken questions and unseen threats. Detective Sterling, aware of the growing frustration, felt a moral burden heavier than procedural protocols could address. He had cases like this before, but each unsolved disappearance was a personal wound, a reminder of lives interrupted, families left in limbo, and the relentless passage of time that favored neither the living nor the missing. And yet, in the quiet despair, a subtle tension lingered. The truth was still out there, waiting. The missing pieces, invisible to the eye but present in the folds of time, promised that closure was possible. The community's pain, anger, and unyielding search for answers would eventually intersect with a breakthrough that no one could have foreseen. The truth would not stay hidden forever, but it would take decades to emerge. By the spring of 2004, the relentless search for Vicki Smith reached an unthinkable impasse. The Orlando Police Department, after months of exhaustive efforts, made the formal decision to suspend the investigation. Case files were labeled suspended. Evidence was carefully stored in the archives, and the young woman who had vanished into the humid Florida night became a name in a drawer, an absence recorded but unanswered. For the community, this procedural closure offered no comfort. Palm Court Estates carried the weight of a tragedy unresolved. Friends, neighbors, and casual acquaintances felt a creeping unease each time they passed Vicki's apartment or glimpsed her car parked untouched. The silence of official closure was deafening, amplifying the tension that had been building since that fateful night. Lauren Wilkes refused to accept the suspension. To her, a suspended case was not closure, it was abandonment. She continued to organize volunteer searches, plastered fading flyers on telephone poles, and pressed the police for answers that were no longer forthcoming. Each polite refusal from the department only deepened her frustration, sharpening the edge of helplessness she carried like a shadow. Detective Victor Sterling understood the procedural necessity of suspending a case without leads. Yet the moral weight pressed on him like a physical burden. Every file, every unanswered question, every trace of absence haunted him. He knew the limits of his resources, the reach of the law, but he also felt the relentless pull of responsibility. The case that began with a scream in the night would lie dormant for 2 decades, leaving families, friends, and investigators suspended in the unbearable tension of uncertainty. Even in official silence, the unspoken truth lingered. Someone had taken Vicki, and the echoes of her disappearance would continue to resonate long after the investigation's doors closed. For Lauren Wilkes, the suspension of Vicki's case was not an end, it was a beginning of relentless torment. Each day brought the same unanswerable question: where is she? Her life, once structured and purposeful, became consumed by a constant, gnawing ache. Sleep eluded her as memories of laughter and late-night plans replayed endlessly, reminding her of the ordinary Friday that had become a nightmare. Lauren refused to allow hope to vanish entirely. She walked the streets near Palm Court Estates, distributed flyers until the paper edges curled from weather, and organized search parties that often scoured empty lots and shadowed corners. Every step felt like a battle against despair. Every unanswered call a personal wound. She pressed the police for updates, enduring polite refusals that left her frustration simmering, a raw, invisible flame. The emotional toll was heavy and unyielding. Anxiety shadowed her, making ordinary tasks feel monumental. She questioned herself constantly. Could I have done something differently? Should I have noticed something? Guilt intertwined with grief, creating a weight that pressed down on her chest with every heartbeat. Her friends tried to offer comfort, but words fell short against the void left by Vicki's absence. And yet, amidst the darkness, Lauren's resolve never faltered completely. The suspension of the case fueled her determination, transforming helplessness into a quiet, unshakable persistence. Every flyer posted, every inquiry made, was a testament to her refusal to forget, to let Vicki fade from memory without a fight. In that struggle, she became both a mourner and a guardian, carrying the pain of loss while keeping the possibility of justice alive. Even as the days stretched into months and months into years, one thought remained constant in Lauren's mind. Vicki's story is not over, and I will not stop until the truth is found. Vicki Smith's parents lived every day suspended between hope and heartbreak. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks, yet the question of their daughter's fate remained agonizingly unanswered. Calls to the Orlando Police Department became ritualistic exercises in restraint and patience, each polite reply from investigators serving as a reminder of the limits of human control. They replayed memories constantly: her bright smile at family dinners, the nervous excitement of planning her move to Atlanta, the tiny silver locket that always hung around her neck. These fragments of normal life collided with the harsh reality of her disappearance, leaving them trapped in a cycle of grief that refused to relent. Even mundane routines were haunted by her absence: the empty seat at the table, her untouched belongings, the silent apartment that once held laughter. Hope flickered intermittently. A phone call from a tip, a sighting, a lead that turned cold, each instance reignited a fragile belief that she might still be found. But as the months stretched into a year, the relentless succession of dead ends eroded optimism. Fear and despair became constant companions, intertwining with lingering guilt. Could we have done more? Did we overlook something critical? Every holiday, every family gathering, carried the weight of absence. Friends and extended family offered comfort, but no words could fill the space where Vicki once existed. Each day, the emotional strain deepened, leaving scars invisible to the eye, but indelibly etched into the hearts of those who loved her most. Even amid the silence of a suspended investigation, her parents held on to one unwavering truth. Their daughter was gone, yet the search for justice was not over. In that painful balance between sorrow and determination, the stage was set for a breakthrough that, though decades away, would finally honor the life stolen from them. Detective Victor Sterling carried the suspension of Vicki Smith's case like a silent weight pressing on his shoulders. Years of training and experience taught him the limits of procedure, the realities of evidence and timelines, but no protocol could ease the moral pressure that gnawed at him daily. The absence of resolution was not just a procedural gap. It was a wound that refused to heal. Every morning brought reminders of a life interrupted. Files stacked on dusty shelves. Notes detailing every interview and lead. And the faint echo of Vicki's smile and the memories of friends and family, all of it pressed on Sterling's conscience. He knew the community's frustration, the parents' despair, and Lauren's relentless determination were mirrored by his own sense of failure. Each unanswered question became a haunting refrain, a persistent reminder that justice had been delayed, perhaps too long. Sterling reflected often on the decisions made during the early investigation. Could something have been overlooked? Was there a lead dismissed too quickly? Every choice, every redirection in the investigation, replayed in his mind with the merciless clarity of hindsight. The detective understood the professional necessity of following procedure, yet the personal toll of unresolved cases created a tension that no regulation could relieve. If you're still watching at this point, you might as well subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The moral weight was compounded by the passage of time. As months turned into years, the memory of Vicki's vibrant personality and the brutal absence left behind lingered. Sterling carried her case in quiet moments, when no one was watching, and in the relentless ache of not knowing. The suspended investigation was not just a file marked cold. It was a living testament to a young woman lost, and a community left, holding the emptiness of uncertainty. And through it all, one thought persisted. Some truths refuse to remain hidden forever, but sometimes the wait is unbearably long. 20 years slipped through the fingers of Orlando, each one leaving Vicki Smith's disappearance farther from the present, but closer to legend. The files sat untouched in metal cabinets, gathering dust and fading ink, a silent testament to a life abruptly halted. In offices where decisions were governed by procedure and evidence, the case became another number, a suspended file, a reminder that the past cannot always be solved with the tools of the present. Technology in 2003 had its limits. DNA analysis was imprecise, and small traces often vanished into the void of what labs called inconclusive results. Every effort made by detectives and analysts ran against the barrier of time, as the material evidence of Vicki's last moments quietly deteriorated. Investigators moved on to newer cases, as all departments must, leaving the memory of her life and absence locked behind bureaucratic walls. For those who loved Vicki, the passing years were unkind. Lauren Wilkes endured the quiet torment of a friend missing, living with the gnawing knowledge that official channels could not or would not provide answers. Her repeated calls, letters, and pleas to review the case were met with patient professionalism, yet the results never changed. The system was designed to prioritize solvable cases, leaving unsolved disappearances like Vicki's to linger in limbo. And still, Orlando carried the memory of her absence. Neighbors remembered her laugh, her bright smile. The small apartment left frozen in time. Each year added a layer of grief and longing, the unresolved nature of the case pressing heavier on hearts and minds alike. 20 years had passed, and the case remained locked away in silence. But the faint pulse of hope, though faint, had yet to vanish completely. As the years progressed, forensic science began to outpace the limitations that had once stalled investigations. New techniques allowed investigators to extract traces of DNA once considered too small or degraded to yield any results. Touch DNA, the ability to analyze minuscule skin cells left behind on objects, opened doors that had been firmly closed. Items that had sat in evidence lockers for decades suddenly held secrets waiting to be revealed. For cold cases like Vicki Smith's, the implications were profound. What had once been a frustrating dead end, the anonymous mailing of her silver locket, the tiniest speck of material trapped near its clasp, now had potential. Analysts could isolate DNA from such tiny remnants and generate a profile that might not have existed 20 years ago. The technology transformed objects once deemed unhelpful into keys that could unlock answers. Even more revolutionary was forensic genealogy, a technique that combined DNA analysis with public genealogy databases. Unknown profiles could now be matched to distant relatives, offering a path to identifying perpetrators who had never been on law enforcement's radar. Cases that had languished in silence for decades could finally find resolution, and families long denied closure could begin to imagine it. For investigators, the emergence of these tools created a renewed sense of purpose. Old files were not just archives. They were potential breakthroughs waiting for the right technology. The very evidence that had once been dismissed or ignored now held the promise of illumination. The question loomed larger than ever. Could these advancements finally shed light on the fate of a young woman who had vanished into a humid Florida night, leaving a community suspended in fear and sorrow? Could a speck of DNA finally lead to the truth? Throughout the 2 decades of silence, Lauren Wilkes became a tireless guardian of Vicki's memory. The suspension of the case had not weakened her determination, it sharpened it. Every unanswered call to the Orlando Police Department, every polite refusal to review old evidence, only fueled her resolve. While most of the community slowly turned their attention elsewhere, Lauren remained a constant presence, carrying the weight of unanswered questions like a torch through the darkness. Her efforts were not just symbolic, they were relentless. She maintained a network of volunteers, posted new flyers when older ones faded under the Florida sun, and tracked any rumor or tip with painstaking attention. Even small developments that others might dismiss as sighting, a misdirected phone call, were carefully noted and pursued. Lauren refused to let the years diminish the urgency of her friend's absence. Emotionally, the toll was heavy. Loneliness, frustration, and grief became familiar companions. She wrestled with the constant fear that time was running out, that each passing year made the possibility of justice more distant. Still, she could not and would not let hope vanish entirely. The memory of Vicki's laugh, her plans for the future, the silver locket she never removed, became both a source of sorrow and a driving force. Lauren's advocacy was more than persistence. It was a declaration that the passage of time does not erase responsibility. She carried the collective desire for justice in her own hands, knowing that the next breakthrough could come from the very evidence that had lain dormant for years. And in that struggle, one question lingered. Have you ever fought for something when everyone else had given up? In the early 2020s, a new generation of investigators began reviewing Orlando's oldest and most puzzling cases. Among them, Vicki Smith's file, long forgotten by many, was pulled from the archives and placed on the desk of Sergeant Dalton Hayes, a determined leader with an eye for details others had overlooked. The once dormant case now received attention infused with both patience and urgency, a renewed effort guided by technological progress. Sergeant Hayes examined every piece of evidence, revisiting reports, witness statements, and the items collected at the time of Vicki's disappearance. Among the old evidence, one item stood out: a silver locket, mailed anonymously shortly after Vicki vanished. At the time, it had yielded nothing. Now, with modern analysis, it held promise. The microscopic traces once dismissed as irrelevant were carefully extracted, generating a partial male DNA profile that was previously unattainable. The breakthrough lay not in new witnesses or confessions, but in the marriage of persistence and technology. Every old document, every discarded clue, became part of a meticulous reevaluation. Hayes's team understood that a single piece of overlooked evidence could finally illuminate the darkness surrounding Vicki's disappearance. For Lauren Wilkes, the revival of the investigation reignited a mixture of hope and caution. The years of waiting had forged resilience, but experience had also taught her the fragility of expectation. Still, the message was clear. The silence that had lasted 20 years was beginning to crack. The question now hung in the air, heavy and compelling. Could new science finally break the silence of a vanished life? The answer remained just out of reach. A suspenseful promise that the story was far from over. In the early 2020s, Sergeant Dalton Hayes arrived at the Orlando Police Department with a mission: to breathe life into the city's oldest, most haunting cold cases. Unlike those who treated archived files as static records, Hayes viewed them as dormant stories waiting for the right moment to be told. Each folder on his desk represented not just evidence, but the echoes of people whose lives had been interrupted and families left suspended in fear. Vicki Smith's disappearance was immediately recognized as one of the most tragic cases in the archives. Hayes read through the original reports with patience and a sharp eye, noting inconsistencies, overlooked details, and, most importantly, the items collected that technology at the time had failed to fully examine. Where others saw a closed file, he saw potential, a path that, with the right tools, could lead to answers. His approach was methodical yet intuitive. Hayes didn't rely solely on protocols. He allowed himself to follow intuition informed by decades of experience. He understood the weight of reopening a case like this, the hopes of a community, the relentless grief of friends and family, and the pressure of finally delivering justice after 20 years. As he began reviewing the old evidence, a sense of urgency grew. The case had been silent for too long, yet Hayes felt the faint pulse of possibility. Every detail, every forgotten object, could be the breakthrough. In the quiet of the office, the question lingered. Could a single detective's determination finally shift the tide on a case frozen for decades? Hayes knew that in this moment, persistence was more than a strategy. It was a lifeline to the truth, waiting to be uncovered. Among the stacks of yellowing files and evidence bags, one item drew Hayes's attention immediately: a silver locket. It had arrived at the Orlando Police Department shortly after Vicki's disappearance, mailed anonymously from Tampa. At the time, it had been logged and set aside, its significance largely underestimated. The tiny object, polished by curiosity and hope alike, now held the potential to break the 2-decade silence. The locket was simple in design, delicate and unassuming. To any passerby, it was just a piece of jewelry, a sentimental keepsake. Yet for Hayes, it represented a physical connection to the missing woman, a fragment of the night she vanished. He examined it closely, noting its faint scratches, the wear around the clasp, and the microscopic material that had been overlooked 20 years earlier. What others had deemed insignificant now carried enormous weight. Modern technology offered something unimaginable to investigators in 2003. With touch DNA analysis, even the faintest skin cells could yield a profile. The locket, once a silent witness, was ready to speak. Hayes submitted it to the lab, knowing that its contents might reveal more than a mere fingerprint. It could hold the first concrete link to the person responsible for Vicki's disappearance. The tension in the room was palpable, though unseen. A single piece of jewelry, dismissed as inconsequential for decades, now carried the weight of justice. Every second that passed felt charged with anticipation. Could something so small finally illuminate the dark corners of a 20-year-old mystery? Hayes understood the stakes. The answer within that locket could transform grief into resolution, suspicion into certainty, and silence into revelation. The lab report arrived with a quiet intensity that belied its importance. The touch DNA extracted from the silver locket had yielded a partial male profile, a tangible, irrefutable link to the person who had taken Vicki Smith from the warmth of her apartment and into a night that had haunted Orlando for 2 decades. For the first time, the cold case transformed from a story of absence into a pursuit with a target. Hayes read the results slowly, absorbing the magnitude of what they meant. This was no longer speculation. The anonymous act of mailing a locket, once dismissed as an oddity, now became the strongest clue in the entire investigation. A real person was behind the decades of silence, a man whose identity had remained hidden until technology finally caught up. The tension in the cold case unit was immediate. Every team member understood the implications. Someone had carried out a crime in the shadow of ordinary life, and now the smallest trace had surfaced to expose him. The quiet hum of the office contrasted sharply with the storm of anticipation in their minds. This DNA profile was a compass pointing toward a long, elusive answer. Hayes knew the next steps would require patience, precision, and strategy. The partial profile would be uploaded to controlled genealogical databases, a process that could narrow the field to distant relatives, offering a pathway to the perpetrator's identity. Every analysis, every connection, would bring them closer to unmasking a figure who had lived undetected in plain sight. And yet, an unsettling question lingered over the room. Could such a tiny fragment, so easily overlooked, truly expose a life hidden for 20 years? The answer promised justice, but also the chilling realization that ordinary people can conceal extraordinary evil. The partial DNA profile had changed everything. What had once been a case frozen in time now surged with possibility. Sergeant Hayes understood that each day brought them closer to naming the person responsible for Vicki Smith's disappearance. The laboratory results were not just data, they were a lifeline to truth. A key capable of unlocking the long-held secrets that had tormented families and a community for decades. The process of genealogical investigation began. Painstaking yet relentless. Analysts traced the genetic clues through distant relatives, mapping branches of family trees with precision and care. Every connection, no matter how small, carried the potential to collapse the decades of uncertainty into clarity. Hayes watched each step with cautious optimism, knowing that one misstep could mean lost time, lost hope. For Lauren Wilkes, the news that the case had finally moved sparked emotions she had not felt in years. Cautious hope, mingled with lingering fear. 20 years of unanswered questions had left deep scars, yet the glimmer of a breakthrough reminded her that her advocacy, her tireless pursuit, was not in vain. The possibility of justice was now tangible, almost within reach, and the question that gripped everyone involved remained unresolved, hanging in the air like a charged current. Could a combination of patience, technology, and determination truly reveal the person who had hidden in plain sight for 20 years? The city held its breath, waiting. The file that had gathered dust for decades was now alive, pulsing with suspense. Every glance at the evidence, every calculated step of the cold case unit, edged them closer to a revelation that would shock the community and bring the long-sought answers to the surface. Would you have ever imagined a single locket could reopen a 20-year mystery? The partial DNA profile from Vicki's locket was entered into a controlled genealogical database, a tool that had not existed when she vanished 20 years earlier. The cold case unit waited with a mix of hope and anxiety, knowing that this single action could transform decades of silence into answers. Each genetic match that appeared on the screen represented a thread, a connection, a path toward the person who had stolen a young woman from the ordinary rhythm of her life. Analysts began tracing these distant relatives, piecing together family trees with careful attention. Every branch narrowed the field. Every shared ancestor reduced the number of possible suspects. What had once been an unknown, faceless figure lurking in the shadows of Orlando was slowly becoming more defined, more real. Hayes and his team watched each new connection with growing intensity, knowing that the breakthrough could arrive at any moment. The work was painstaking and slow. A single error could misdirect months of investigation, wasting time and prolonging the anguish of Vicki's loved ones. Yet, the cold case unit pushed forward with unrelenting focus. Each genealogical lead was cross-checked, verified, and mapped to create a clear, traceable path. People always forget to subscribe, so here's a quick reminder before we continue. And then, finally, the breakthrough emerged. A name appeared, connected through a chain of relatives that ultimately led to a man living quietly in the Orlando area. The revelation was almost surreal. A real person, a tangible individual, had been identified after 2 decades of uncertainty. The question hung heavily in the air. Could this person, whose existence had gone unnoticed for 20 years, truly be the one responsible? Every step forward was both exhilarating and terrifying. A reminder that justice had been asleep for too long and that soon, the truth would demand to be faced. The name that emerged from the genealogical search was Wallace "Wally" Dixon, a man who, by all appearances, was the embodiment of normalcy. He lived in a modest home just 15 minutes from Vicki Smith's old apartment, maintained a steady job as an office manager, and raised a family with no hint of the darkness that would soon be revealed. For the community, and even for the investigators, the revelation was staggering. The person responsible for a decades-old disappearance had been living openly, invisibly, in plain sight. Hayes and his team moved carefully, gathering every scrap of information about Dixon. He wasn't connected socially to Vicki, had no record of harassment or criminal behavior, and had never drawn attention to himself in any meaningful way. He had passed completely under the radar, a neighbor, a co-worker, a coach, and a friend, all roles that made his identification as a suspect even more shocking. The dissonance was impossible to ignore. How could someone so ordinary be linked to a crime that had terrified a city for 20 years? The investigators had to balance disbelief with meticulous planning. Each step forward was calculated, cautious, and informed by the knowledge that exposure would not only bring justice but also shatter the illusion of safety that Dixon's community had taken for granted. In the quiet moments of the investigation, Hayes reflected on the unsettling truth. Predators can blend seamlessly into daily life, and the people we trust most may not be who they seem. The cold case unit's task had shifted from theory to confirmation. They were no longer chasing shadows. They had a name, a face, and a puzzle that promised to reveal the hidden story behind one of Orlando's most haunting mysteries. Could someone in your neighborhood have a hidden past? With Wallace Dixon identified, the cold case unit shifted into high gear. Hayes and his team scrutinized every detail of his life, searching for anything that might link him to the night Vicki vanished. His movements, routines, and associations were mapped with precision. Even the smallest inconsistencies became potential clues. Every aspect of Dixon's seemingly ordinary existence was examined under the intense glare of suspicion. The investigators discovered that, in 2003, Dixon had lived just minutes from Palm Court Estates and had access to a dark blue Ford Taurus, a vehicle that matched the grainy surveillance footage seen near the corner where Vicki disappeared. Each piece of the puzzle aligned too neatly to ignore. It was as if the city's most unremarkable man had been perfectly positioned to commit a crime that would remain unsolved for 20 years. Hayes understood the psychological weight this placed on the team. They were dealing with someone who had hidden in plain sight, someone whose ordinary life concealed a terrifying act. The tension in the office was thick. Every discovery brought equal measures of anticipation and dread. Could the evidence they gathered withstand scrutiny? Could they confirm, without doubt, that Dixon had taken Vicki? The stakes were intensely personal for Hayes and his team. 2 decades of grief, unanswered questions, and community fear hung in the balance. The closer they moved toward certainty, the more the magnitude of Dixon's hidden life became apparent. The ordinary man, the neighbor, the coach, the father he had lived undetected, while leaving an entire community haunted by questions. The closer they got, the more terrifying the realization became. Could the man everyone trusted be the monster they sought? Wallace Dixon's life seemed ordinary in every sense. Morning coffee runs, office meetings, weekend Little League games with his children. To his neighbors, he was dependable, polite, and unremarkable. Yet, the cold case unit knew the truth. For 20 years, this man had carried a darkness that had remained invisible, hidden behind the mask of everyday normalcy. The realization was deeply unsettling. Evil, they now understood, often wears the face of the mundane. The investigators felt the weight of the emotional storm this revelation would unleash on the community. Families who had passed Dixon on the street, friends who had shared barbecues or casual conversations, would struggle to reconcile the man they knew with the person responsible for a young woman's death. For Hayes and his team, there was no comfort in the ordinariness of the suspect. It only heightened the urgency to bring justice for Vicki. Every detail of Dixon's routine, once unremarkable, now demanded scrutiny. Patterns of absence, places he frequented, vehicles he drove, all became pieces of a puzzle that painted an unnerving portrait of a predator living unnoticed. The suspense was unbearable. The answer had been there all along, lurking in plain sight, waiting for the technology and determination to uncover it. For Lauren Wilkes, the discovery would soon be an emotional reckoning, relief, anger, and sorrow intertwined as she imagined the life that had been stolen, the years lost, and the proximity of the perpetrator all along. The truth was both a relief and a shock. Justice was approaching, but at a cost to hearts already scarred by decades of uncertainty. What would you do if the person responsible had been living quietly next door all these years? The cold case unit began their careful observation of Wallace Dixon, following him through the rhythm of his daily life. From the early morning coffee in a modest cafe to the quiet commute to his office, every movement was noted, recorded, and analyzed. To any casual observer, Dixon was ordinary, polite to neighbors, attentive to his children, and a reliable presence in his community. Yet Hayes and his team knew better. Every smile, every wave, every mundane interaction carried the weight of deception. They watched as Dixon coached a little league team, cheering on children whose laughter echoed through the park. He maintained his home meticulously, mowing the lawn, washing the car, attending community events. The contrast was almost unbearable. The very man who had shattered a young woman's life seemed to inhabit an entirely separate, unremarkable existence. The investigators' eyes followed him from street to street, noting the small routines that made him appear invisible. Grocery store runs, casual walks, office interactions, all were cataloged. Every glance from the investigators was a reminder that the monster they sought was not hidden in darkness, but moving openly among the unsuspecting public. Suspense grew as the team pieced together the opportunities Dixon had to commit the crime, mentally overlaying the timeline of Vicki's disappearance with his daily habits. The ordinary man they observed could be the same individual whose presence had gone unnoticed for 20 years, a chilling reality that weighed heavily on everyone in the unit. Every calm moment they watched him live was a reminder sometimes the most ordinary faces hide the darkest secrets. Each day, Wallace Dixon moved through his life with the calm precision of a man entirely ordinary. He greeted neighbors with friendly nods, laughed with colleagues during lunch breaks, and attended his children's weekend games with pride. On the surface, he was a model citizen, the kind of person no one would ever suspect. But for the cold case unit, every simple act carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. The very ordinariness of his life was a mask for something horrific, a terrifying reminder that appearances could be deadly misleading. As Hayes watched Dixon at the Little League field, cheering his team with enthusiasm, he felt the dissonance gnawing at him. This man, so calm, so familiar, had taken a life and concealed it for 20 years. Every mundane activity, walking to the mailbox, picking up groceries, chatting casually with a neighbor, was now loaded with the tension of knowledge. Investigators imagined the moments in 2003 when Dixon had lurked unnoticed, his dark intentions hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. The contrast was suffocating, a constant reminder that evil often wears the most ordinary face, blending seamlessly into the fabric of daily life. The team meticulously documented each routine, each habit, each interaction. The deeper they observed, the more intense the suspense became. They were staring at a man whose life seemed ordinary in every sense, but whose past held an act so violent, so deliberate, that the community would soon struggle to comprehend it. As he smiled and laughed among friends and family, the truth lingered. What seems normal may hide the unimaginable. When news of Wallace Dixon's connection to Vicki Smith's disappearance began to surface, the community was thrown into a whirlwind of disbelief. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues struggled to reconcile the man they had casually waved to, shared small talk with, or trusted around their children, with the person responsible for a young woman's death 2 decades earlier. Shock rippled through Palm Court estates and beyond. Conversations that once centered on mundane concerns, yard work, grocery runs, weekend plans turned to whispers of fear, anger, and betrayal. People replayed every interaction they had with Dixon, searching for signs they had missed, haunted by the unsettling possibility that someone they knew, someone they trusted, had been hiding a monstrous secret all along. For many, the realization was deeply personal. Mothers wondered how a neighbor like Dixon could have harmed a young woman without anyone noticing. Friends questioned every casual smile or friendly wave, wondering how easily deceit could mask true intent. The ordinary acts of kindness and civility that once comforted the community now carried a weight of suspicion and fear. Within the cold case unit, Hayes observed the ripple effect of their work. The revelation of Dixon's identity confirmed the suspicions of investigators but also intensified the emotional gravity of the case. Justice was imminent, yet it arrived alongside a chilling reminder. The predator had been invisible, living openly, shielded by the very ordinariness that allowed him to escape detection for so long. How would you feel if someone you passed daily, someone you trusted, turned out to be capable of the unimaginable? The surveillance of Wallace Dixon had revealed the terrifying truth. The man who had lived a quiet, ordinary life for 20 years was the one responsible for Vicki Smith's disappearance. Hayes and his team now held the evidence and knowledge that could finally bring closure to a case that had haunted an entire community for decades. Every movement Dixon made became a tense countdown toward justice. The investigators tracked him through his morning commute, office tasks, and family interactions, fully aware that the moment of confrontation was approaching. The ordinary routines that once seemed comforting now carried a dark suspense, each step bringing the team closer to uncovering a long-hidden truth. Community anticipation, though not fully aware of the specifics, hung like a low hum. Soon, the reality of Dixon's identity would shatter the comfort of the familiar, replacing casual trust with fear and disbelief. Hayes knew that when the arrest came, it would not only deliver justice for Vicki, but also force the community to confront the unsettling reality that predators can hide in plain sight, behind the most unremarkable facades. Don't blink, what seems ordinary may hide the unimaginable. Could someone near you be living a secret life you would never suspect? Suspense and emotion intertwined as the cold case unit prepared for the operation that would finally confront Dixon. 20 years of unanswered questions, grief, and fear were about to meet accountability. The case, once dormant, had been reignited, proving that persistence, science, and vigilance could finally pierce through decades of silence. Every ordinary action by Dixon had been a countdown. Every ordinary face could conceal a story yet untold. And soon, the community would see that even the most familiar lives can contain hidden darkness. The morning of the arrest arrived quietly, almost deceptively calm. Wallace Dixon followed his routine, completely unaware that the cold case unit had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. Hayes and his team coordinated with precision, each officer aware of their role, every movement planned to minimize risk while ensuring Dixon could not escape. Dixon left his home for work, the same as always. Unmarked vehicles trailed discreetly, the investigators blending into the background, watching the man whose life had once been an enigma now unfold in real time. Every step he took was observed with a mix of anticipation and restrained tension. The ordinary man moving through the neighborhood carried the weight of an unimaginable secret, and the team's eyes never left him. At the precise moment, the unit moved. Officers approached silently, surrounding the driveway as Dixon reached his car. The quiet neighborhood erupted in controlled authority. The click of doors, the clear, firm voice commanding compliance. Dixon, still processing, froze. He raised his hands slowly, the years of hidden guilt catching up with him in an instant. The operation was over almost as quickly as it began. There were no dramatic chases, no violent struggle, just the arrest of a man who had spent 2 decades hiding in plain sight. Hayes felt a mix of relief and awe. Years of painstaking work, patience, and persistence had led to this precise, chillingly ordinary moment that now marked the turning point in a 20-year-old case. After 20 years, the moment that once seemed impossible had arrived. Every day, every routine Dixon followed had led to this confrontation. Justice, finally, was at hand. News of Wallace Dixon's arrest spread like wildfire, igniting shock and disbelief throughout Orlando. The man who had appeared ordinary, the neighbor who smiled politely, the father and community volunteer. He was now the face of a crime that had haunted the city for 20 years. Television crews flocked to Palm Court Estates, their cameras capturing stunned neighbors exchanging incredulous whispers. Headlines splashed across screens. Florida cold case solved, and ordinary life, hidden horror. The juxtaposition between Dixon's calm suburban existence and the brutality of his crime left the public reeling. People replayed interactions they had once deemed mundane, searching for signs that they had missed. Every friendly wave, every casual greeting, now carried a shadow of suspicion. The city's sense of security fractured. Conversations shifted from everyday concerns to questions of trust and vigilance. Social media buzzed with outrage, fear, and disbelief. Residents debated how someone so integrated into the community could commit such an act and remain undetected for decades. Questions of morality, fate, and justice filled homes, offices, and schools. The media emphasized the psychological shock. A predator who had blended seamlessly into daily life, whose crime had remained a ghost for 20 years, had finally been revealed. For the public, it was a reminder that even the most ordinary lives might conceal unimaginable secrets. Could someone in your neighborhood be hiding a past no one would ever suspect? How would you react if the person you waved to daily turned out to be capable of the unthinkable? When Lauren Wilkes first saw the news of Wallace Dixon's arrest, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. For 20 years, she had carried the weight of Vicki's disappearance, haunted by unanswered questions and the gnawing fear that justice might never come. And now, the face on the screen, the smiling, ordinary man, was the person responsible. Relief surged, swift and overwhelming, but it was immediately intertwined with sorrow. 20 years of grief, frustration, and relentless searching collided in a storm of emotions that left her shaken. The closure she had longed for was finally within reach, yet the cost, the years of absence, the stolen life, the relentless fear could never be returned. Lauren walked past the empty apartment that had once been Vicki's sanctuary, now a silent witness to a tragedy that had stretched across decades. She recalled the countless nights spent distributing flyers, the phone calls to the police, and the sleepless hours of imagining every possible scenario. Each memory now carried a bittersweet weight, a mix of triumph for uncovering the truth and devastation for the loss that could never be undone. The confrontation with reality was sharp. She had imagined a monstrous figure, someone unrecognizable and terrifying. Instead, she was met with the ordinary face of a man who could coach Little League, host family barbecues, and pass unnoticed in the neighborhood while hiding the unimaginable. The dissonance was almost unbearable. A cruel reminder that evil can wear the mask of normalcy. How do you reconcile decades of grief with the face of your friend's killer? Could the person you once trusted truly be capable of such darkness? The arrest of Wallace Dixon marked the end of a 20-year wait, yet the emotional journey was far from over. For the community, the news was a shockwave relief mixed with disbelief, fear, intertwined with justice finally served. The ordinary neighbor, the familiar face in the crowd, had been hiding a truth no one could have anticipated. For Vicki Smith's family, there was solace in knowing that the man responsible was finally accountable. The long, dark shadow of uncertainty lifted slightly, leaving room for mourning to take on a new, if still painful, form. Lauren Wilkes felt the shift most keenly, a mixture of vindication for her relentless pursuit and sorrow for all the years lost, experiences stolen from Vicki, and the life that would never be lived. Detective Hayes and the cold case unit experienced a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge of what had been endured before the breakthrough. The meticulous work of revisiting evidence, the integration of modern forensic technology, and the patience to follow leads years old, had all converged in this singular moment. It was a victory for persistence, for science, and for justice. Yet, even as closure arrived, a lingering unease remained. The realization that a predator could exist unnoticed, seamlessly integrated into daily life, left the city cautious, reflective, and forever changed. Conversations now carried questions of trust and vigilance, a new awareness that ordinary appearances could mask extraordinary darkness. 20 years of unanswered questions met accountability today. How does a community move forward when the person behind the fear was living quietly among them all along? Wallace Dixon's confession was a revelation that stunned everyone involved. He described the night with a chilling calm, recounting how a moment of opportunity had led him to commit an act that would haunt a city for 2 decades. He had seen Vicki leaving her shift at Java Jolt, noticed the broken headlight, and made a snap decision, a decision that would alter countless lives forever. He admitted to following her quietly, offering a ride under the guise of helpfulness. When Vicki refused, he overpowered her swiftly, leaving no witnesses and no immediate signs of struggle. In that instant, an ordinary man transformed into a figure of terror. The coldness of his admission sent shivers through the room, but the most haunting detail was his lack of remorse for the act itself. Dixon detailed how he had concealed his crime with careful precision. He described driving Vicki's car to a remote section of the Ocala National Forest, burying her there, and ensuring that the site was almost impossible to locate. Each step was calculated, every movement intentional. He spoke of the effort he put into returning the Honda Civic to Palm Court Estates, as if nothing had occurred, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. The investigators listened in disbelief, realizing that for 20 years, a life had been erased, and a man had walked freely in plain sight. The confession was more than an explanation of events. It was a portrait of opportunity exploited, a life stolen, and the terrifying capacity of someone who could commit such acts without detection. Could the seemingly ordinary person next door make a decision in a moment that changes lives forever? The answer is chilling, and it begins to unfold here. After the crime, Wallace Dixon's calculated actions revealed a disturbing attention to detail. He did not simply vanish with Vicki. He orchestrated a chilling performance meant to mislead investigators and torment those left behind. Her small, dented white Honda Civic, the car she had driven countless times, was returned to Palm Court Estates, parked precisely where she had left it. To anyone glancing out that night, nothing seemed amiss. Even more unnerving was the silver locket, the gift from Vicki's grandmother she had never parted with. 2 weeks after her disappearance, it arrived at the Orlando Police Department, mailed anonymously from Tampa. Dixon confessed that this was no act of remorse. It was psychological manipulation, a way to control the narrative, misdirect suspicion, and create an illusion of an unknown witness. Every tiny speck of evidence left behind had been calculated, leaving law enforcement chasing shadows for decades. Investigators later realized the brilliance and horror of his method. Returning the car reinforced the idea that Vicki might have gone voluntarily, or that she had been taken by someone outside the community. Mailing the locket further suggested a mysterious, perhaps external involvement. Only through the breakthroughs in modern forensic science would these acts finally lead directly back to him. The confession sent chills through the team. For 20 years, these deliberate deceptions had frustrated and haunted investigators. Each step Dixon took had been designed to appear ordinary, to erase his presence, to play the long game. The mundane became terrifying, the familiar twisted into a tool of control. And the evidence of his crime finally revealed a calculated predator who had lived alongside unsuspecting neighbors for decades. When news of Wallace Dixon's confession spread, Orlando was gripped by disbelief. The idea that an ordinary neighbor, someone who had smiled at barbecues, coached Little League, and blended seamlessly into the community, could commit such a calculated and horrific act was almost impossible to accept. People questioned their own perceptions, wondering how evil had been hiding in plain sight for so long. Residents replayed interactions with Dixon in their minds, searching for clues they might have missed. Conversations once considered friendly now carried a weight of suspicion. The ordinary gestures of a neighbor, the small kindnesses that had seemed harmless, were suddenly chilling reminders that appearances could be deceiving. Families whispered about Vicki's fate, about how a bright, hopeful young woman had vanished without a trace and been silenced by someone living among them. The horror was amplified by the meticulous deception: the returned car, the mailed locket, the calculated absence of evidence, all designed to mislead and torment for decades. Community leaders and local media struggled to process the shock. Headlines screamed of betrayal and fear, painting a portrait of a town forever changed. The disbelief was almost tangible. A mixture of grief, anger, and the unnerving realization that evil can wear the mask of normality. How would you react if someone you've waved to every morning for years turned out to be capable of unimaginable darkness? Could you ever trust your neighbors in the same way again? Wallace Dixon's confession forced the community to confront a reality far more unsettling than imagined. For 20 years, he had maintained the perfect facade. A devoted father, a supportive husband, a coach for neighborhood children, and a quiet figure in the workplace. Every smile, every friendly greeting, every ordinary routine had been carefully maintained to hide the dark secret festering beneath. Neighbors struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the predator revealed by the confession. Barbecues, school events, and casual chats became haunting memories, reminders that someone capable of murder had walked unnoticed among them. The ordinary life he curated was a shield, a deliberate performance designed to blend seamlessly into normalcy, while his secret remained buried, just like Vicki in the Ocala National Forest. Even those closest to Dixon expressed shock. Friends and colleagues who had interacted with him daily wrestled with disbelief. The duality of his existence created a gnawing fear. If he could deceive an entire neighborhood, what else could go unnoticed? The realization was sobering. Horrific acts can hide behind the most familiar faces, leaving communities shaken to their core. For Lauren Wilkes, seeing Dixon's ordinary life juxtaposed with the truth of his crime was almost unbearable. Every ordinary detail, fatherhood, community involvement, the calm demeanor felt like a deliberate betrayal. The image of Vicki, full of laughter and plans, clashed violently with the ordinary domestic life Dixon had maintained, amplifying the grief and rage she had carried for decades. The conclusion of Wallace Dixon's confession and the revelation of his hidden life left a profound mark on everyone connected to the case. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived, but it came entwined with grief that no verdict could erase. Lauren Wilkes felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that the nightmare had an answer. Sorrow that Vicki's life had been stolen so violently, and for so long. The community wrestled with the knowledge that someone so seemingly ordinary had inflicted unimaginable harm. Trust, once implicit, was fractured. The case became a stark reminder that evil does not always announce itself and that vigilance, compassion, and the pursuit of truth are essential in protecting lives. For the investigators, decades of frustration transformed into a sense of closure, but also humility. Every cold case held stories like Vicki's lives interrupted, families scarred, questions unanswered. The breakthrough reinforced that science, persistence, and human determination could finally pierce the silence of lost years. After 2 decades of uncertainty, the team of investigators returned to the Ocala National Forest, armed with Wallace Dixon's confession and the chilling details only he could provide. The forest, now overgrown and transformed by years of weather and neglect, offered a daunting challenge. Every tree, every shifting patch of earth could conceal evidence, but the officers pressed on, guided by determination and Dixon's exact recollections. The moment the excavation uncovered the site of Vicki's burial, silence fell. Her remains, long hidden beneath layers of soil and roots, confirmed the fears that had haunted her friends and family for years. This was not just a discovery. It was a long overdue acknowledgement of a young life stolen too soon. For Lauren Wilkes, seeing this tangible proof of Vicki's fate was a storm of grief, relief, and anger all at once. Memories of laughter, late-night talks, and shared dreams surged back, a painful contrast to the brutal reality now unearthed. Investigators handled the recovery with respect, understanding the weight of the moment. Each careful movement through the forest carried a dual purpose: to secure evidence for the upcoming trial, and to honor the memory of the young woman whose life had been stolen. The wider community watched the developments unfold through news coverage. The discovery of Vicki's remains sparked outrage, mourning, and a collective reckoning with the fact that someone so ordinary in their midst had committed such a crime. The long silence, once deafening and agonizing, was finally broken. With Wallace Dixon in custody and Vicki's remains recovered, the focus shifted to the courtroom. Prosecutors, seasoned in building complex cases, faced the challenge of presenting evidence from a crime that had been hidden for 2 decades. The cold case unit worked tirelessly, compiling every detail from the locket, the DNA analysis, and Dixon's confession, creating a timeline that left no room for doubt. Investigators revisited old notes, witness statements, and timelines, ensuring that every piece of evidence was meticulously documented. The weight of the decades-long investigation was palpable. The files, once gathering dust, were now central to securing the justice Vicki had been denied for so long. Legal teams coordinated to ensure that every element from the forensic breakthroughs to witness testimonies would be compelling and credible in court. The anticipation was intense. For Lauren Wilkes, the impending trial brought a mixture of hope and dread. Finally, the man responsible for her friend's disappearance would face judgment, but the memories and pain would never fully fade. The community, too, braced itself. Media outlets captured every development, and the city of Orlando watched, rapt, as the machinery of justice prepared to confront a crime that had once seemed unsolvable. Every meeting, every legal strategy session, underscored the gravity of what was at stake. The trial was more than a legal formality, it was a confrontation with the consequences of evil hidden in plain sight. For Lauren Wilkes, the trial's approach marked the first step toward confronting a grief that had shadowed her life for 2 decades. The recovery of Vicki's remains and Wallace Dixon's confession had provided facts, but emotions are never so easily settled. Each court date, each preparation for testimony, forced Lauren to relive the night Vicki vanished, the agonizing uncertainty, and the long, silent years that followed. Vicki's family experienced a complex mix of relief and sorrow. The mystery that had tormented them for 20 years was finally unraveling. Yet the realization that their daughter's life had been stolen in such a brutal, calculated manner reopened old wounds. They found themselves navigating a delicate balance, grieving anew, while clinging to the hope that the trial would deliver justice. The community, too, shared in this emotional journey. Friends, neighbors, and supporters of Vicki's case attended hearings, read updates, and offered support to the family. Collective sorrow mingled with a cautious sense of resolution, as if the city itself had been holding its breath for justice to arrive. For Lauren, the moments of closure were quiet and intimate. Standing in the courtroom, hearing the details recounted, and knowing that the person responsible was being held accountable brought a bittersweet sense of finality. It did not erase her loss, nor the pain of 20 years, but it offered a rare opportunity to reclaim some measure of peace. The conclusion of Vicki Smith's case left the community with more than answers. It left lessons carved into the collective conscience. The most unsettling truth was how ordinary someone could appear while carrying out a crime so devastating. Wallace Dixon had been a neighbor, a coach, a parent, someone whose presence seemed harmless and even comforting. His hidden violence served as a stark reminder. Evil does not always announce itself. For investigators and citizens alike, the case underscored the power of persistence and the relentless march of science. 20 years of unanswered questions had finally met the breakthroughs of modern forensic techniques. Touch DNA and genealogical analysis transformed what once seemed impossible into certainty, proving that truth can emerge even after decades of silence. Lauren Wilkes and Vicki's family demonstrated the strength of unwavering advocacy. Their refusal to let the case fade into obscurity ensured that Vicki's story would not end in mystery. Their persistence serves as a beacon, showing that action, determination, and patience can hold perpetrators accountable, regardless of how much time has passed. The story also calls on the broader community to remain vigilant, aware, and informed. Awareness of what can hide behind familiar faces and the value of scientific innovation can serve as tools to protect future potential victims. For Lauren Wilkes, the psychological toll of Vicki's disappearance had been relentless. 20 years of unanswered questions, fleeting hopes, and sleepless nights had become an invisible weight she carried daily. Even the smallest reminders, a coffee cup, a shared joke, A neighborhood street could trigger memories of a life interrupted too soon. The moment Wallace Dixon was arrested brought a surge of relief, but it was intertwined with the lingering ache of time lost, experiences stolen, and a friendship brutally cut short. Vicki's parents endured a parallel struggle. Their grief had never followed a linear path. There were moments of forced optimism, attempts to move forward, and then the sudden jolt of despair each time a lead went cold. The recovery of Vicki's remains offered some closure, yet the reality of what had been done to their daughter remained a haunting presence in their minds. Detective Sterling, long retired, reflected on the weight of unresolved cases. The professional frustration of being unable to protect a young life collided with a profound personal empathy. Even after years away from active investigation, the echoes of Vicki's case lingered, a reminder that justice is often delayed, but perseverance is essential. Psychologically, the community itself felt the strain. Fear, suspicion, and the shadow of doubt had settled over Palm Court Estates. Trust in ordinary interactions became cautious. Even the return of normalcy after the arrest carried the weight of memory, a constant reminder of how easily evil can disrupt everyday life. How does a community and the people within it heal when the truth surfaces decades too late? Could you bear the tension of waiting years for justice? Vicki Smith's case cast a long shadow not just on her family and friends, but on the community as a whole. It served as a reminder that ordinary streets, familiar faces, and everyday routines can conceal dangers no one anticipates. Residents of Orlando, particularly those near Palm Court Estates, were forced to confront a difficult truth. Sometimes the threat is not a stranger lurking in the dark, but a neighbor who blends seamlessly into daily life. The story highlighted the vital importance of community vigilance. Parents, friends, and neighbors realized that awareness, communication, and collective care are not just ideals, they are essential for safety. Discussions about personal security, checking on one another, and staying alert to unusual behavior gained new urgency. Community meetings, neighborhood watch programs, and informal support networks became more than precautionary measures. They became tools to reclaim a sense of safety and control. Society at large also felt the echo of this story. True crime stories like Vicki's challenge the notion that tragedy is confined to certain places or people. They serve as cautionary tales, emphasizing the need for empathy, accountability, and proactive action. Beyond fear, the case inspired conversations about justice delayed and the power of persistence, illustrating that time cannot erase the need for truth. The breakthrough in Vicki Smith's case underscored how science can transform what once seemed hopeless into tangible justice. 2 decades after her disappearance, modern forensic technology opened doors that had been sealed by time. Touch DNA, capable of detecting microscopic traces left behind by a simple touch, and forensic genealogy, linking unknown DNA profiles to distant relatives, became the keys to solving a mystery that had haunted Orlando for years. Forensic advancements meant that cases long considered lost could be revisited with fresh eyes and powerful tools. What had once been a single speck of biological material on Vicki's locket, insignificant in 2003, became the thread connecting investigators to Wallace Dixon. The meticulous science revealed patterns that human observation alone could not, highlighting the potential of innovation to rewrite the endings of countless unresolved crimes. This revolution extended far beyond a single case. Cold cases nationwide began to see movement. Families of missing persons found renewed hope, and communities were reminded that even decades-old mysteries could yield answers. Investigators found themselves armed not just with intuition, experience, and patience, but with data and methods capable of piercing years of silence. For Orlando, the lesson was clear. Patience, advocacy, and science together could expose hidden truths. What had seemed like a permanently sealed file cabinet of despair was suddenly a map pointing to justice. Could science have a solution for every mystery left unsolved? How many stories might finally see closure because of technology like this? The arrest of Wallace Dixon and the resolution of Vicki Smith's case rippled through Orlando, leaving an indelible mark on the community. In the wake of decades of fear and uncertainty, neighbors began to reconnect, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. Palm Court Estates, once a place haunted by whispers and caution, found itself at the center of conversations about resilience, vigilance, and the power of collective care. Community gatherings and discussions became spaces for reflection and understanding. Residents shared memories of Vicki, recounted the months and years of worry, and acknowledged the ways the unresolved mystery had affected them all. These conversations were not just about fear, they were about learning from the past, strengthening bonds, and ensuring that no one felt alone in the face of uncertainty. Awareness campaigns and neighborhood initiatives emerged, driven by the lessons learned from Vicki's disappearance. Residents became more proactive, checking in on one another, organizing watch programs, and creating systems of support that transformed anxiety into actionable community strength. The shared trauma of 20 years created a collective resolve. The understanding that vigilance, empathy, and active engagement were essential to safety. Healing was gradual, and not everyone moved forward at the same pace. Yet, the community's transformation illustrated the human capacity to endure, adapt, and reclaim peace after a prolonged period of unease. The tragedy became a catalyst, shaping a neighborhood that refused to be defined by fear, and instead, embraced the opportunity to grow stronger together. The story of Vicki Smith closes not with emptiness, but with a sense of hard-won justice. After 20 years of silence, the truth emerged not as a fleeting headline, but as a lasting testament to persistence, courage, and the relentless pursuit of answers. Lauren Wilkes finally exhaled a breath she had been holding for decades, feeling both the relief of closure and the weight of the years she had spent in uncertainty. For Vicki's family, the confirmation of what had happened brought a painful clarity. Their grief remained, but now it was framed by understanding and truth. The nightmare of endless questions had ended, replaced by the sobering knowledge of justice served. Communities that had lived with fear and suspicion could begin to trust again, to reclaim streets and conversations that had once been overshadowed by dread. The case also left a powerful lesson. Evil often hides behind ordinary faces, and time alone does not erase the need for accountability. Yet, the story shines a light on the strength of human determination, how advocacy, love, and advances in science can pierce decades of darkness. We've all seen stories like this, but this one reminds us to never stop searching for truth. Share this story, because awareness is the first step toward safety. The legacy of Vicki Smith is a reminder that while darkness may linger, the pursuit of justice, the power of persistence, and the courage to confront truth can bring light even after decades of silence.